guys in the dark.
When I was in high school, I had a lot of these experiences. At the house that my dad lived in at the time. It was really old, built in the early 1800s. There were plenty of times that I'd be sitting in the living room and distinctly hear the cabinets opening up and closing in the kitchen. It was just me and my dad that happened to live in that house. You could clearly see when his bedroom door was shut and he was asleep, but you could still hear it. Normally my dad worked 7 to 3, but occasionally would work a PM or overnight shift. One night he was working until 11 o'clock. I was 17 at this time. Around 8 or so, I'm sitting in my room playing Borderlands, and I think that I hear footsteps coming from the living room, which happen to be adjacent to my bedroom, and I assume that my dad was home early. I go back to playing Borderlands. I keep hearing the steps, so I just pause the game and listen. The footsteps are just slowly pacing back and forth between the living room and the kitchen. In a steady rhythm, mind you. I laid in bed, scared shitless, and actually counted the footsteps. Every time it took 15 paces to the living room, and 15 back to the kitchen. Needless to say, I did not sleep that very night. I had another situation at my mother's house, about 2 years prior to this. Out of nowhere, my alarm clock would go off at midnight, every single night. I assumed that it was busted, and I got rid of it. Fast forward 2 years, my mom gets another brand new alarm clock for my room. Also, I was 17. Suddenly, my alarm goes off at midnight. I thought nothing about it. I turned it off. It happened again the very next night, and then my sister pointed out the old one that I had that did it. So I checked and made sure that no alarms were set. I double-checked at exactly 11:56 p.m. Sure enough, 4 minutes later my alarm goes off. Freaked out, I threw it out the window. The next night was my dad's night to have me, and I had a buddy of mine over. My dad was working that night. He left for work around 2 a.m., and my friend had brought over an iPod dock to listen to music on. We didn't have the clock set or anything. My friend knew nothing of the last couple of nights, so I knew that he wasn't just fucking with me. So about 2 minutes after my dad leaves, we hear an alarm clock coming from my room. I went in, and you know how if you just plug in a clock without setting it, the numbers just blink on and off? Well, it was doing exactly that. As soon as I picked it up, the clock set itself to 12, and then just went off by itself. So yeah, screw paranormal stuff. I'm not religious at all. But I am convinced 100% that this was paranormal, or something even freakier. About 5 years ago, my mom started dating a guy that she met on a dating website. This part is just fine. I had just recently started dating the woman who would later become my wife, and we had met online as well. I'll just refer to her as my wife. Anyways, my wife and I never really liked this guy. We didn't think that he was mean or anything like that. He was just a little creepy. He was quiet. He kept his eyes closed a lot, and occasionally said odd things like offering my wife a chocolate, then popping one in his mouth, closing his eyes, and moaning as he let it melt into his mouth. One time my wife and I were visiting my mother, but she had got called into work. So we waited at her house. Her boyfriend was over, but he spent the entire several hours just hanging out in her bedroom with the door closed. Just before Christmas time, my mom and this guy started having some difficulties. My wife and I were visiting her for the holidays. She dropped all of her problems on us. We listened very carefully and told her our opinions and suggested that she could be better off without him. She also had her mind made up, though, and decided to break up with him on Christmas Eve. We spent the next night at my mom's, got up early on Christmas morning to visit my dad at his house. We didn't plan to spend the night at my dad's, but we got snowed in, which was actually a nice Christmas surprise. The very next day, we left as soon as we could get through the snow, and my wife had suggested that we stop by my mother's house on the way so that we could see if she was okay. My wife just really had a bad feeling about my mom's now ex-boyfriend. My mom's car was in the driveway, but that doesn't mean much because she lives close enough to work that she often walks, and it didn't snow in her town. She also never locked the doors, which drives me absolutely batshit crazy. So we just let ourselves in. That's when we could see blood oozing out of the refrigerator's water dispenser. It had filled up with the spill container that was leaking onto the floor, and had made a puddle. My wife had screamed. I freaked out. I fully expected to see my mom's head in that freezer. I nervously opened the freezer to find a bag of frozen cherries that had been opened, crammed into the freezer, that had fell onto the ice dispenser, and then melted. Later on, I had found my mom just sitting there, watching TV in her room. I found out that her boyfriend had left. Thank God. I was really worried for my mother's safety. The scariest thing that I've had happen while camping. So I live in eastern Oregon. My mom lives in western Oregon. I went to go visit her for the summer. She's a very outdoorsy person, so we decided to take the hour drive from her city to the coast. We ended up at this free campsite at the top of this hill. It's a huge foothill of the coastal mountains, about 25 minutes from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road happens to be. And we were the only campers that were there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, stuff like that. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mother. I'm really not sure what about. I wasn't suspicious of this at the time. And they just leave. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake up easily, so I heard her gasp, and it happened to wake me up. As soon as she saw that I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what was going on. It was dead silent. All of a sudden you hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, go grab your gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter. Mind you, he wasn't there either. Just us girls, like I previously had said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mom and her quick wit. And these guys actually believing that my dad was there with a gun. In high school, my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We had done it before, and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other, or our girlfriends. We all thought that it was just a joke. That night there was no one else home except for the 7 of us. We were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every single time. It gave answers that seemed really historical, especially accurate for our town. Things we neither cared or knew about. Long story short, the spirit claimed that it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s, was buried there too, in an unmarked grave. My friend's house happened to be on a farm in the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical, and we were all assuming one of us was trying to just scare the rest of us. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove that he was with us. It went to yes, and then spelled out knock. Then the planchette stopped moving. We all just stared at it silently, and then there was a rap, rap, rap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside, and there was absolutely no one out there. We never touched that fucking board ever again.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.